De-dollarization, inflation spinning beyond control, the rise of BRICS challenging American influence, and a technological rebellion called Bitcoin. Everywhere you look, the global financial system feels like it's shifting beneath our feet. Headlines warn of cracks in the dollar's foundation, markets tremble, and nations quietly prepare for a future where U.S. dominance is no longer guaranteed. But none of this makes sense. None of it, unless you understand how the dollar empire was built in the first place. And the truth is more surprising than most people realize, because the architect of this entire centralized power structure wasn't a president, wasn't a treasury official, and wasn't a Federal Reserve chairman. It was a man from the 19th century, a man most Americans know only as a ruthless industrialist, the original robber baron, John D. Rockefeller. His empire didn't just dominate oil, it created the blueprint for how energy could be used to control markets, shape nations, and eventually anchor the world's most powerful currency. Standard Oil wasn't just a business, it was the prototype for the Petro-Dollar system that would define the 20th century. And today, that system is under attack from both sides. Rising geopolitical powers like China and Russia, and a decentralized technology designed to escape the very kind of control Rockefeller perfected. In this episode, we uncover the hidden link between Rockefeller's oil empire, the birth of the petrodollar, and why BRICS and Bitcoin are now fighting to dismantle the legacy he left behind. To understand why Rockefeller's empire mattered and why its shadow still hangs over today's monetary struggles, you have to understand his core belief. Rockefeller saw the world through a lens most Americans of his time couldn't comprehend. He believed that free competition, the thing politicians praised as the heart of American capitalism, was actually waste, chaos, a system where dozens of small players fought and duplicated each other's efforts, driving up costs and dragging down progress. To him, real power, real efficiency, came from centralization. This was the principle that guided everything he built. While others saw an open market, Rockefeller saw an engine missing its center. If he could control the middle, if he could coordinate the flow of refining, transport, and distribution, he could create a system that ran smoother, cheaper, and far more predictably than anything the free-for-all oil fields could produce. And in his mind, that wasn't domination, it was improvement. But Rockefeller's insight went deeper than operations. He understood something fundamental about the industrial world. Energy isn't just another commodity. Energy is the bloodstream of civilization. It powers factories, railroads, households, armies. Whoever controls energy doesn't just control a business. He controls the pace of the modern world. That's why Standard Oil didn't stop at winning market share. It consumed it. At its peak, the company refined nearly 90% of America's kerosene. 90%. Imagine any essential resource today, electricity, water, or the internet, being shaped almost entirely by one company. That was the scale of Rockefeller's influence. Political cartoons of the time captured this perfectly. Standard Oil as a massive industrial octopus, its tentacles stretching across the map, gripping railroads, state capitals, and global trade routes. But those cartoons revealed something else too. The fear and awe that come when one entity holds the lifeblood of industry in its grasp. And this philosophy of centralization, this belief that energy is the master lever of global power, didn't end with Rockefeller. It became the template, the quiet blueprint for how the United States would later build a system that tied oil to the dollar and transformed American currency into the foundation of global trade. And that blueprint sets the stage for the next piece of the story, how Rockefeller's energy empire lived on long after Standard Oil was broken apart, and how it helped create the petrodollar system that defined the 20th century. Even after the Supreme Court broke Standard Oil apart in 1911, Rockefeller's influence didn't disappear. It multiplied. The pieces of his empire, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and their global partners, later known as the Seven Sisters, became the backbone of America's energy dominance throughout the 20th century. They controlled reserves, dictated supply routes, and shaped global pricing. In many ways, they weren't just oil companies, they were extensions of American power. And they carried Rockefeller's philosophy of centralization into a new era. But it wasn't until 60 years later that this legacy transformed into something far greater. Something that would bind the entire world to the US dollar. In 1971, President Richard Nixon faced a crisis few Americans fully understood at the time. The United States was running massive deficits. Foreign governments were demanding gold in exchange for their dollars. Gold the US no longer had. If nothing changed, the dollar risked collapsing under its own weight. Ending the gold standard solved one problem, but created another. What would give the dollar viable now? Washington needed a new anchor, a new form of backing, a new foundation for global trust. And so American officials turned to the one resource their corporate descendants effectively dominated: oil, the lifeblood of modern industry, the very resource Rockefeller had built his empire upon. This was no coincidence. It was the logical evolution of his blueprint. In the early 1970s, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger negotiated a deal that reshaped the world economy. The agreement was simple in theory, but profound in impact. Saudi Arabia, and eventually the entire OPEC coalition, would price and sell all of their oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, the United States would provide security guarantees, military support, and a stable market for Saudi oil. This arrangement forced every nation on Earth to hold dollars, because every nation needed oil. It created unending global demand for American currency. It transformed the dollar from a national currency into the world's reserve engine. This was the birth of the Petro-Dollar, a system where energy and money fused into a single structure of centralized power. A system that didn't just support the dollar, it amplified it, sustained it, protected it. Visualize the chain reaction: Nixon ending the gold standard, Saudi Arabia agreeing to dollar-based oil, the Seven Sisters controlling global distribution, and nations worldwide now required to accumulate dollars simply to keep their lights on and their factories running. This wasn't an accident. It was the modern expression of Rockefeller's worldview. Control the energy, and you control the economy. Control the economy, and you control the world. By the late 20th century, the petrodollar wasn't just a financial agreement. It was a geopolitical architecture. And for decades it held firm, funding American influence abroad, stabilizing US debt, and reinforcing the dollar's global supremacy. But no system stays unchallenged forever. Because the very strength of the petrodollar, the tight centralization, the intertwining of energy and currency, would eventually create its own vulnerabilities. And soon, nations and technologies would rise to strike at the heart of the structure Rockefeller helped build. And that moment is where our story turns next. For decades, the petrodollar system seemed untouchable. It powered American influence, stabilized global markets, and gave the dollar a level of trust no rival currency could match. But the very strength of that system carried a hidden risk, because once a nation controls the world's financial arteries, it also inherits the temptation to use them as weapons. And that moment eventually came. When the United States began imposing sweeping sanctions, cutting entire economies off from dollar-based networks, and even freezing the reserves of countries like Russia, something shifted. To Washington, these were tools of national security, but to many nations around the world, they were a warning. A clear message that the dollar, once seen as a neutral global currency, could now be used to enforce American policy far beyond its borders. And from that moment, the slow rebellion began. The BRICS coalition, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, emerged as the center of that pushback. These nations, each for different reasons, began seeking ways to bypass the dollar entirely. What started as quiet experiments became bold, public actions. Today, Russian oil flows in yuan. India buys energy with rupees. Some trades are even settled in gold. And China is steadily pushing for an alternative financial architecture that competes directly with the dollar's network. To many Americans watching from afar, these developments feel distant, but their significance is enormous. Each non-dollar transaction chips away at the foundation that made the petrodollar system so dominant. Each new trade agreement outside the dollar hints at a future where U.S. currency is no longer the mandatory gateway to global energy. The BRICS nations aren't just rejecting the dollar, they're building a world where American centralization no longer dictates the flow of oil, credit, or influence. They see themselves not as challengers, but as architects of a new, multipolar order, one where no single nation holds the power Rockefeller's legacy once enabled. And yet, the geopolitical revolt is only half the story. Because at the very same moment BRICS is challenging the dollar from the outside, a very different kind of force is rising from within. One built not on nations, but on code. A force that challenges not just dollar dominance, but the very idea of centralized money. And that force is where our story goes next. While BRICS challenges the dollar from the outside, a very different kind of threat has risen from within the digital world. One that doesn't rely on nations, alliances, or geopolitics. It challenges the very idea of centralized control itself. And in many ways, it is the exact opposite of everything Rockefeller believed. Because if Standard Oil represented the height of industrial centralization, Bitcoin represents radical decentralization. Rockefeller built power by tightening control over every pipeline, every refinery, every railway car. Bitcoin was designed to eliminate control altogether. No central bank, no chairman, no board, no oil fields to seize, no cartel to negotiate with, just a network, open, borderless, and mathematically enforced. To a 19th century industrialist like Rockefeller, such a system would have been unthinkable. To 21st century institutions built on his logic, it is deeply disruptive. Bitcoin challenges the petrodollar at its philosophical core. The dollar derives strength from political agreements, military guarantees, and its role in global energy trade. Bitcoin derives value from scarcity, a fixed supply written into code. The dollar operates through intermediaries. Bitcoin operates through consensus. The dollar relies on trust in governments. Bitcoin relies on trust in mathematics. This is why many call it digital gold. Not because it replaces energy, but because it introduces a form of value immune to the mechanisms that underpin the petrodollar system. Rockefeller used oil, the resource that powered industry, to anchor American influence. Bitcoin proposes a world where no one can anchor or dominate anything, where no single nation can weaponize money, where financial networks operate without a central owner. To millions of Americans frustrated by inflation, debt cycles, and geopolitical uncertainty, Bitcoin offers something the traditional system cannot: the promise of opting out. A system where the rules cannot be rewritten overnight. A currency that moves outside the reach of political decisions or international sanctions. To the supporters of decentralization, this isn't speculation, it is liberation. And yet its rise forces a difficult question. If Bitcoin represents the antithesis of Rockefeller's worldview, how will governments respond? Because for the first time, the architecture of centralized finance is facing a challenger that cannot be bought, acquired, sanctioned, or controlled. And that sets the stage for the next chapter, where the fight shifts from ideology to the future design of money itself. We are living through a moment that historians will study for generations. A moment where three systems of financial power are colliding all at once. On one side stands the petrodollar, the centralized framework that has anchored American influence for more than half a century. Opposite it rises a new multipolar order led by BRICS, determined to reduce its dependence on the dollar and rewrite the rules of global trade. And cutting through both, like a fault line beneath the world economy, is the decentralized rebellion of Bitcoin, challenging not just the dollar, but the very concept of control itself. It is a rare thing to witness a shift this large, a shift in how nations project power, a shift in what money means, a shift in the architecture of trust. And yet beneath all of it, the ghost of Rockefeller still moves quietly through the story, because as governments search for ways to defend their authority in a world where money can slip beyond borders and code can outmaneuver institutions, a new idea has emerged, one that carries the unmistakable signature of Rockefeller's worldview: central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. To some, they represent modernization, efficiency, a way to upgrade the financial system for the digital age. But to others, they reflect something far older, the logic of Standard Oil translated into software, a system where the tools of crypto are adopted, but the power remains tightly centralized. If Rockefeller were alive today, he wouldn't see CBDCs as a threat. He would see them as the future. Technology built not to decentralize control, but to perfect it. And that is the crossroads we now face. A world moving between three visions of money, one centered on American energy, one driven by emerging geopolitical blocs, and one built on mathematics rather than authority. Rockefeller may be long gone, but the battle he began, the battle between centralized power and financial freedom, has only grown larger, louder, and more consequential. And whether the next chapter of global finance is written by the petrodollar, by a BRICS-backed currency, or by a decentralized network of code, will shape not just markets, but the very meaning of sovereignty in the 21st century. So the question now passes to you. Which system do you believe will define the future? The petrodollar and its digital successor, the CBDC? A rising currency backed by BRICS? Or the radical independence of Bitcoin? Tell us your prediction in the comments below. And if you'd like to go deeper into the forces reshaping our world, make sure to subscribe to Econ Atlas.